So the administrative state, what is it? And why should you care? The administrative state, it's this phenomenon of the executive branch and legislative branch. But what it is basically is it is the executive branch exercising its power to create, adjudicate, and enforce their own rules. Now, the executive branch has numerous agencies. And if you aren't familiar, the executive branch is, just think basically of the President of the United States. And then you have, right, the other two arms, branches, there you go, branches of our government, is the judicial branch, which is the law, right, the justices. And then you have the legislative branch, which is Congress, right, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Well, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch all have their own agencies. But the administrative state mainly is referring to the agencies of the executive branch. And I'm going to share a little bit of a history lesson here for you. And a little bit later on, I'm going to tell you exactly how many agencies there are. And it will blow your mind. You've heard the term big government before. This is just going to blow your mind. So, quick history lesson. So in my last episode, episode 33, it was about the fundamental flaw of today's progressivism. And I mentioned in that episode that progressivism actually started back in the 1900s, right around 1890, 1900 through 1920. Okay. And during that time, the administrative state actually began as well. That was known as the Progressive Era, and one of the presidents during that time was Woodrow Wilson. And during Woodrow Wilson's administration, he created the first agency that fell within the executive branch. And then after the Progressive Era, again ending in the 1920s, you moved into FDR and his New Deal, right? So President Roosevelt, his administration took it a step farther. So Wilson created the first agency, but then FDR and his administration created multiple agencies. And it was then during that time, during the New Deal era, that the belief, which is still present today, and we'll get into this here in a second, the belief that experts and scientists know better. And you may have heard that on the news recently, depending on, or other podcasts, depending on who you listen to, but that's the mindset. That scientists and experts know better. And therefore, if they work in the government, then the government knows better. But who do they know better than? They know better than you and me. Now, I know for me, that's not true. That is not true. That sweeping generalization, that is not true. The experts and scientists do not know better. Right? And I think you'll agree with me on that. But during that New Deal, that was where that mindset came from. During FDR, the belief that experts and scientists know better. And because they know better, they can reshape American society moving forward. Right? That's what the New Deal was about. It was about reshaping American society coming out of the Great Depression. And the belief was, and is today, that the government knows how best to do that. And then you jump from the New Deal, which again was in the 1930s, all the way up to the 1960s, known as the New Society. And that begins from the 60s and comes actually all the way to today, which we're talking about 60 years now. Well, that New Society began with Lyndon B. Johnson. And you remember he came in to become president because he was the vice president for President Kennedy, who was assassinated. And during this second wave, which again now spans 60 years, even more and more and more agencies were developed. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying that every agency was created by a Democratic administration, because that is not the case. Plenty of agencies, actually, I read that more agencies were created actually under the Reagan and Bush W administrations than in other Democrat administrations. So don't go pointing fingers thinking that it's just Democrats who create these agencies, because it's not the case. But listen to this number. Listen to this number of agencies, and it is going to blow your mind. So according to the Administrative Conference of the United States, there are estimates between 78 and 137 independent federal agencies. But wait, in addition to the 78 to 137 independent agencies, there is estimated 174 to 268 more executive agencies. So put those two together, you're talking about a range of 250 to 400 agencies in our federal government. Can you believe that? Now, I'm sitting here and I read that, I'm thinking, what in the world can the government be doing that would require anywhere between 250 and 400 agencies? Like, I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about, we have transportation, we have, like financial regulations, we have food, we have drug, we have healthcare, we have, just kind of go down this list. And I'm thinking, how do you get to 400? How do you even get to 250? And there's this document called the Federal Register. And the Federal Register is basically, it's used to measure like the size and the scope of the federal government. Guess how many pages this thing is? In 2016, 95,000 pages. The Federal Register in 2016, 95,000 pages to document the 250 to 400 agencies that exist within our federal government. So you might have thought about big government before, but when I thought about big government after reading this, it's just a whole new level, right? 250 to 400 agencies, 95,000 pages to document all of these agencies. Unreal. So the administrative state has just exploded. Again, this started in the early 1900s. So we're talking about over a course of 120 years, and really less than that, probably about half if you go back to the New Society and Lyndon B. Johnson. So in about 60 years, maybe the most 90 years, going back to the New Deal, you're talking about 200 to 350 agencies were added to what existed during those time periods.